The rain hammered the windshield as Park Ranger Marcus Chen spotted the makeshift tent tucked beneath the pine canopy of Glacier National Park. Inside, a mother clutched her two young children, all three soaked and shivering in the Montana wilderness. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been watching the forest for more than just wildlife violations. He'd been waiting for them to return. Marcus cut the engine and sat in the darkness, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel. Through the downpour, he could make out the woman's silhouette as she tried to shield her children from the storm. The tarp she'd strung between two trees was failing, water streaming through tears in the plastic. The boy looked maybe 8, the girl younger, 6 at most. Their thin jackets were no match for the October cold. He'd first spotted them 3 days ago, near the old logging road, but they'd vanished before he could approach. Standard protocol demanded he contact social services, maybe the sheriff. Instead, Marcus had been quietly monitoring the area, leaving food where they might find it. Something about the way the mother moved, constantly checking over her shoulder, never staying in one place long, told him this wasn't ordinary homelessness. The radio crackled to life. Unit 7, we've got reports of suspicious vehicles on Route 2. Black SUVs, no plates. You see anything out there? Marcus lifted the handset slowly. Negative, dispatch, all quiet on the north sector. He clicked off before they could respond. The timing wasn't coincidence. In 20 years of watching these mountains, Marcus had learned to recognize when the past was clawing its way back to the surface. The abandoned research facility buried beneath Sector 7 was supposed to be forgotten, its entrance sealed, its secrets buried with a dozen families who died in the government's biological warfare experiments. But certain people never forgot, and they had long memories for loose ends. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the woman's face for just an instant. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the exhaustion etched in her features, the desperate way she held her children. She was running from something, and that something had found her trail. Marcus grabbed his rain gear and stepped into the storm. The woman noticed him immediately, her body tensing as he approached with his hands visible and empty. Her eyes darted to possible escape routes, a mother's instinct calculating odds and distances. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Chen, Park Ranger," he called out, raising his voice over the wind. "You and your kids need to get out of this weather." She pulled her children closer. The little girl was coughing, a wet sound that cut through the rain. "We're not doing anything wrong," the woman said, her voice hoarse. "We'll move on in the morning." "You're not in trouble." Marcus stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk without shouting. "But this storm's getting worse, and hypothermia kills fast out here. I know a place, dry, warm, completely off the books." The woman studied his face, weighing trust against necessity. "Why would you help us?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Because 20 years ago, someone should have helped me." A distant rumble echoed through the valley. Engines, not thunder. The woman's face went white. She'd heard it too. "They found us," she whispered. Then louder, urgent, "Emma, Jake, we have to go. Now." The children scrambled to their feet, well practiced in the art of rapid departure. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched them move. These kids had been running for a while. "This way," Marcus said, making the decision that would change everything. "Stay close and keep quiet." He led them away from the trail, deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thick enough to hide them from aerial surveillance. The woman, he still didn't know her name, kept pace despite her exhaustion, one hand on each child's shoulder. Every few steps, she glanced back toward the approaching sound of vehicles. After 15 minutes of hiking through increasingly rough terrain, Marcus stopped beside what looked like a natural rock outcropping. He pressed his hand against a specific point on the stone face, and a section of rock swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark passage. "What is this place?" the woman asked, staring into the blackness beyond the entrance. Marcus pulled a flashlight from his belt. Cold War bunker, built in the 60s for research purposes. Government abandoned it decades ago. He didn't mention the real reason it had been abandoned, or what they might find in the deeper levels. "I got this," he told her, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside his chest. "Trust me." The woman looked at her shivering children, then at the hidden entrance, then back at Marcus. Behind them, the sound of engines grew closer. "Okay," she whispered, and stepped into the darkness. Marcus followed, sealing the entrance behind them, hoping he wasn't leading this family to their deaths. The steel door groaned against decades of rust as Marcus forced it open, the sound echoing through the forest like a wounded animal. Behind him, Sarah clutched her children closer, her eyes darting between the dark opening and the ranger who had promised them safety. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. He hadn't been down here in 3 years, not since old Peterson had shown him the entrance during his first week on the job. "Just storage," Peterson had said with a dismissive wave, "leftover junk from when the government had their fingers in everything." The beam of Marcus's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow concrete corridor that stretched into black nothing. The air that escaped carried the scent of stale metal and something else, something chemical that made his nose wrinkle. But it was dry, and right now, dry was all that mattered. "Stay close," he murmured, stepping inside. His boots echoed against concrete as Sarah and the children followed, the little girl whimpering softly against her mother's shoulder. The boy, maybe 8 years old, pressed against his mother's other side but kept his eyes fixed ahead with the kind of alertness that no child should possess. 20 feet in, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. Marcus swept his flashlight across the space, revealing banks of electrical panels along one wall, their switches and dials dark and silent. Metal shelving units lined the opposite wall, most empty except for a few scattered boxes and what looked like old radio equipment. "What is this place?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Old government facility," Marcus replied, though as his light revealed more of the space, he began to suspect Peterson had been less than truthful. The electrical systems were too sophisticated for simple storage. Thick cables ran along the ceiling, disappearing into holes drilled through the concrete walls, and there, in the far corner, he could make out what looked like a communications array, its antenna folded down but still gleaming despite the dust. A soft click made him freeze. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Then he realized what he'd heard. The door behind them had swung shut. "It's fine," he said quickly, seeing Sarah's panicked expression. "Just the weight of it. Doors like that are designed to seal automatically." He hoped that was true. The children needed rest, and Sarah looked ready to collapse. Marcus guided them to a clear area near the wall where someone had left a few folded blankets in a metal cabinet. They smelled of mothballs, but they were dry and thick. "Why don't you get the kids settled?" he suggested. "I'll see what else is down here. Maybe find us some water." Sarah nodded, her relief evident as she spread the blankets on the concrete floor. The children curled up against her immediately, their small bodies finally beginning to relax for the first time since Marcus had found them. He left them his smaller flashlight and ventured deeper into the facility with his main light. A second corridor branched off from the main chamber, and he followed it past several doors marked with faded signs, communications, monitoring, authorized personnel only. The last door stood slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open and stepped into a room that made his breath catch. Banks of monitors covered 3 walls, their screens dark but still humming with residual power. Below them, control panels bristled with switches, dials, and indicators. At the center of the room sat a single chair facing the main display wall. This wasn't storage. This was a command center. His flashlight beam found a logbook open on the central console. The entries were dated, the most recent from just 2 weeks ago. Marcus leaned closer, his pulse quickening as he read the cramped handwriting. Subject observation continuing. Family unit now stationary for 72 hours. Children showing signs of stress adaptation. Recommend immediate containment before exposure becomes liability. The words blurred as Marcus read them again. Subject observation. Family unit. His stomach dropped as the implications hit him. He flipped back through the pages, finding entries going back months, all tracking movement through the forest, noting campsites, recording behavior patterns. Someone had been watching the families who came here, watching and documenting and planning. A soft sound from the corridor made him spin around. Footsteps, too heavy to be Sarah or the children. Marcus killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. "I know you're in there, Marcus." The voice was calm, almost friendly. "Peterson told me you might end up down here eventually. Smart of you to bring them straight to us. Saves us the trouble of tracking them down." In the darkness, Marcus could hear Sarah's voice calling his name from the main chamber, worry creeping into her tone. The children would be frightened, wondering where their protector had gone. He'd thought he was saving them. Instead, he'd delivered them exactly where someone wanted them. The steel door groaned on its hinges as Marcus pushed it wider, the sound echoing into the depths beyond. He fumbled for his flashlight, the beam cutting through darkness that had remained undisturbed for months. The familiar musty smell hit him, concrete, rust, and something else he could never quite identify. Something that spoke of secrets buried deep. "Stay close," he whispered to Elena, who clutched Tommy against her chest, while Sarah pressed against her mother's side. The little girl's eyes were wide with wonder and fear as the flashlight beam revealed the bunker's entrance corridor. Marcus had discovered this place 2 years ago during a routine survey of the forest's outer boundaries. Hidden beneath decades of overgrown vegetation and camouflaged by artificial rock formation, it had taken him 3 attempts to find the entrance again after his initial discovery. The bunker stretched deeper into the hillside than he'd ever fully explored, its Cold War origins evident in the military-grade construction and the faded radiation warning symbols still visible on some of the walls. He'd never told anyone about it. Something had held him back from filing the required reports, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the place felt untouched by time, preserved like a museum of paranoia. Or maybe it was the instinct that some secrets were better left undisturbed. Now, leading this desperate family into its depths, he wondered if that instinct had been wrong. "Is it safe?" Elena's voice was barely audible, but he caught the tremor in it. "Safer than out there," he replied, though he wasn't entirely certain what he meant by that. The men at the campsite had been methodical, professional. They would expand their search pattern eventually. The main corridor opened into a larger chamber, and Marcus swept his flashlight across the space. Emergency lighting fixtures hung dark from the ceiling. Along one wall, he could make out the shapes of old equipment covered by canvas tarps. In the center of the room sat a metal table and several chairs, as if whoever had used this place had simply stepped out for a moment. "There's a generator," he said, more to himself than to the others. "I got it running once before." He moved toward the far corner, where the machine squatted like a mechanical beast. "Give me a minute." As he worked to prime the generator, Elena settled the children on the floor near the wall. Sarah had stopped crying, but her breathing was still uneven. Tommy remained silent, his small face tracking every movement Marcus made. The generator coughed to life on his 3rd attempt, and overhead fluorescent lights flickered and hummed before casting their harsh glow throughout the chamber. The sudden illumination revealed details the flashlight had missed. Charts covered one wall, topographical maps of the region marked with colored pins and notations in faded ink. Another wall held what looked like communications equipment, dials and switches arranged in precise military order. Elena gasped softly, and Marcus turned to see her staring at something behind him. He followed her gaze to a bulletin board covered with photographs and documents. Black and white surveillance photos of the town, aerial shots of the forest, and what appeared to be personnel files with photos attached. "What was this place?" she whispered. "Some kind of monitoring station, I think," Marcus replied. Though looking at it now under the harsh lights, he realized his previous casual explorations had barely scratched the surface. Cold War era. They built these things all over the country. He moved closer to examine the photos. Many showed the town as it had appeared decades earlier, smaller, less developed but recognizable. Others depicted areas of the forest he knew well, though the terrain looked somehow different in the black and white images. One photograph made him pause. It showed a group of men in civilian clothes standing beside several cars parked at what looked like a forest access road. The image was dated 1987. Something about the composition reminded him of the scene they'd fled from tonight. The careful positioning of the vehicles, the purposeful stance of the figures. "Marcus." Elena's voice cut through his concentration. "Tommy needs water." He turned back to the family, pushing aside his growing unease. These were immediate problems: water, warmth, safety. The historical mysteries could wait. "There's a supply room through that doorway," he said, pointing to a passage he'd barely explored on his previous visits. "Should be bottled water, maybe some emergency rations." As he headed toward the supply room, his radio crackled to life. Bob's voice emerged from the static, distorted but urgent. "Marcus, you copy? We've got a situation. Those search and rescue folks, they're asking questions about you specifically. Want to know your usual patrol routes, where you might take someone if they needed shelter." "Marcus, respond." Marcus grabbed the radio, his finger hovering over the talk button. Through the static, he could hear voices in the background at the ranger station, voices that didn't sound like any search and rescue team he'd ever encountered. He looked back at Elena and the children, then at the photographs on the wall. Some secrets, he realized, refused to stay buried. The bunker's steel door groaned shut behind them, with a hollow clang that seemed to echo through the earth itself. Marcus flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through absolute darkness to reveal a narrow concrete corridor stretching ahead. The air was stale but surprisingly dry, carrying the faint metallic tang of old electronics and rust. "Stay close," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure why he was whispering. Something about this place demanded quiet reverence, like a tomb. Sarah clutched both children against her sides, their wide eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like startled deer. Tommy's earlier excitement had evaporated the moment they descended the hidden steps, replaced by the instinctive wariness children possess for places adults fear. Marcus led them forward, his boots echoing against concrete that looked disturbingly new for something supposedly abandoned 40 years ago. The walls were lined with conduit and pipes, everything painted in that particular shade of government green that seemed designed to drain hope from the human spirit. But the paint wasn't peeling, wasn't faded. If anything, it looked fresh. The corridor opened into a larger space, and Marcus swept his flashlight in a wide arc, revealing what had once been some kind of command center. Banks of dark monitors lined the walls, their screens black but somehow expectant, as if waiting for the right signal to flicker back to life. Dust motes danced in the light beam, but there wasn't as much dust as there should have been. Not nearly enough. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, her voice barely audible. "What is this place?" "Emergency command bunker," Marcus replied, though even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. "Built during the Cold War, in case of nuclear attack. The government had them scattered all over the country. But that didn't explain the fresh paint, or the fact that the air circulation system was clearly still functioning. He could feel a faint breeze against his face, or the way some of the equipment looked far too modern for 1982 technology. Emma tugged at her mother's jacket. "Mummy, I don't like it here. It smells funny." She was right. Beneath the metallic tang was something else, something organic and unpleasant. Marcus followed his nose, the beam of his flashlight dancing across banks of switches and dials until it landed on a desk in the far corner. Papers were scattered across its surface, and his heart rate spiked as he realized they weren't yellowed with age. "Stay here," he told Sarah, but she was already following him, unable to resist the terrible magnetism of discovery. The papers were incident reports, printed on crisp white stock that couldn't be more than a few months old. Marcus's flashlight beam trembled slightly as he read the header, Blackwood Initiative, Containment Protocols. Below that, a series of dates, all recent. all within the past year. His blood turned to ice water as he scanned the reports. Missing persons, hikers who'd disappeared in this section of forest, families like Sarah and her children who'd been seen entering the area but never seen leaving, and at the bottom of each report the same notation: subject relocated, Protocol 7 implemented. Marcus. Sarah's voice was tight with fear. Look at this. She was standing beside another bank of equipment, pointing at a series of monitors that were, impossibly, glowing with soft green light. Security feeds, live security feeds, showing various sections of the forest above. Marcus could see his own truck parked where he'd left it, could see the path they'd taken to reach the bunker entrance, and he could see the black SUVs. 3 of them, moving slowly along the Forest Service road with their headlights off, guided only by moonlight. They were maybe 10 minutes away from his truck, maybe less. "We need to leave," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, a new sound reached them through the bunker's ventilation system. The distant rumble of engines, not from the road, from somewhere much closer, somewhere underground. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. "What's happening? What is this place really?" Before he could answer, the monitors around them began displaying new feeds. Underground tunnels extending in every direction from the bunker, and moving through those tunnels, figures in military fatigues, carrying weapons that definitely weren't Cold War surplus. Marcus felt the walls closing in, not metaphorically but literally. The bunker suddenly felt impossibly small, a trap rather than a refuge. His mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, explanations for what they were seeing. But every scenario led to the same terrifying conclusion. They hadn't stumbled into an abandoned relic of America's past. They'd walked directly into something very much alive, very much operational, and very much designed to make sure that anyone who discovered it never left to tell the tale. The footsteps in the tunnels were getting closer. Emma started to cry. The bunker's metal door groaned shut behind them, sealing out the last traces of natural light. Marcus flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through absolute darkness to reveal a narrow concrete corridor stretching ahead. The air smelled of rust, old metal, and something else, a staleness that spoke of decades of abandonment. "Stay close," he whispered, though his voice seemed to echo despite his caution. Sarah clutched Emma and Tommy against her sides, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. The corridor opened into what had once been the bunker's main operations room. Marcus swept his light across banks of obsolete equipment, massive radio consoles with countless dials and switches, all dark now, their screens blank as dead eyes. Dust motes danced in his beam like tiny ghosts. "What is this place?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Emergency communications facility," Marcus replied, keeping his explanation simple. "Built during the Cold War, been abandoned since the 80s. What he didn't tell her was how he'd discovered it 3 years ago during a routine survey, or how the entrance had been carefully camouflaged, or how some of the equipment looked far more recent than it should have. Some secrets were better left buried, at least until he understood them himself. He led them deeper into the bunker, past rooms filled with rusted filing cabinets and furniture draped in military-issued tarps. The air grew warmer as they moved away from the entrance, and Marcus was relieved to find that the ventilation system, though old, still functioned. "Here," he said, pushing open a door to reveal what had once been a break room. Metal tables and chairs were scattered about, and a small kitchenette occupied one wall. Most importantly, it had no windows to let light escape and concrete walls thick enough to muffle sound. This should work. Sarah set down their meager belongings while the children explored cautiously. Emma ran her small hand along the concrete walls, fascination overcoming fear. Tommy remained closer to his mother, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. Marcus checked his watch. Nearly midnight. Above ground, whoever was hunting them would be expanding their search pattern, probably setting up roadblocks and checking every motel, shelter and safe house in a 50-mile radius. Down here, they were invisible. "I need to ask you something," he said, turning to Sarah. "And I need the truth. What exactly did your husband do for Meridian Technologies?" Sarah's face went pale in the flashlight's glow. She glanced at her children, then back at Marcus. "How did you—" "The men who came to your house mentioned the company name. I heard them talking." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting together. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. David was a software engineer. He worked on something called Project Blackwater. Government contract. He found something he wasn't supposed to find. "What kind of something?" "I don't know the details. He wouldn't tell me, said it was safer if I didn't know. But he was scared, Marcus, really scared. He started making copies of files, hiding them. He said we might need to run someday." She laughed bitterly. "I thought he was being paranoid." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's temperature. Government contracts, hidden files, professional killers. This was way beyond a simple corporate dispute. "Where are these files now?" Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything's on here. David gave it to me the night before they killed him. He made me promise to take it to a journalist he trusted if anything happened to him." The tiny device seemed to pulse with danger in the dim light. Marcus had stumbled into something massive, and every instinct told him to walk away. But looking at Emma and Tommy, exhausted children who'd done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong father, he knew he was already in too deep to turn back. "We'll figure this out," he told Sarah, though he had no idea how. "Right now, you need rest. I'll keep watch." As Sarah settled the children on some folded tarps, making the best bed she could manage, Marcus positioned himself near the door. He turned off the flashlight to conserve battery and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. In the silence, he could hear the bunker's subtle sounds, the whisper of air through vents, the occasional tick of cooling metal, the soft breathing of the family he'd sworn to protect. Somewhere above, their hunters were probably still searching, following cold trails and checking empty hiding places. But Marcus knew this respite was temporary. Sarah's USB drive contained secrets that powerful people would kill for, and they wouldn't stop hunting until they found it. The question wasn't whether their enemies would eventually track them down, it was how much time Marcus had to figure out their next move. As the hours crawled by in the underground darkness, he began to realize that saving this family might require him to become something he'd never been before. A man willing to fight a war he didn't understand, against enemies he couldn't see, with stakes higher than he'd ever imagined. The steel door groaned shut behind them with a finality that made Sarah's stomach clench. The sound echoed through what felt like a cavernous space, though she couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Marcus's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing glimpses of concrete walls and metal fixtures that gleamed dully in the artificial light. "Stay close," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "The main living area's just ahead, but there are maintenance shafts and storage rooms branching off. Easy to get lost down here." Emma pressed against Sarah's side, her small hand gripping the fabric of her mother's jacket. Tommy had gone unusually quiet, his earlier excitement at their underground adventure replaced by something more cautious. The air smelled of metal and concrete, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of decades of isolation. Marcus led them down a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they moved, triggered by motion sensors that somehow still functioned after all these years. The pale green glow cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the space feel more like a tomb than a shelter. "How is there still power?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady for the children's sake. "Geothermal system," Marcus replied without turning around. "The whole facility was designed to be self-sufficient for months, maybe years. Most of the systems still work, though I wouldn't trust all of them." They emerged into a larger space that might have once served as a command center or briefing room. Banks of defunct monitors lined one wall, their dark screens reflecting the ghostly light. Metal desks and chairs remained bolted to the floor in precise rows, as if their occupants had simply vanished mid-meeting. Sarah could almost imagine the hurried conversations, the urgent phone calls, the weight of decisions that could reshape the world. "There's a dormitory section through there," Marcus said, gesturing toward another corridor. "Basic bunks, but they're clean and dry. There's also a kitchen of sorts, though you wouldn't want to trust any of the preserved food they left behind." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, I don't like it here. It feels like a scary movie." Sarah knelt down, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "It's just different, sweetheart. Think of it like camping, but indoors. We're safe here, and that's what matters." But even as she said the words, Sarah felt a creeping unease that had nothing to do with the underground setting. Marcus moved through the bunker with too much familiarity, his flashlight beam finding switches and doorways without hesitation. This wasn't the first time he'd been here, maybe not even the second or third. "You've used this place before," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. Marcus paused, his hand on what looked like a blast door marked with radiation warnings. "Sometimes, when the weather gets bad or when I need somewhere quiet to think. The Forest Service doesn't exactly provide luxury accommodations." There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't telling the whole truth, but Sarah decided not to press. Whatever Marcus's relationship with this place, he'd offered them shelter when they desperately needed it. She couldn't afford to be suspicious of the only help they'd found. Tommy had wandered over to one of the defunct computer terminals, running his fingers over the dusty keyboard. "Mom, look at this old stuff. It's like a museum." "Don't touch anything," Sarah said quickly, then caught herself. The sharpness in her voice had drawn Marcus's attention. "I just mean, we don't know what might still be active down here." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good instinct. Most of it's harmless now, but there are areas of the bunker that are still off limits. Sealed sections where they stored things that are better left undisturbed." The way he said it sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just an abandoned shelter. This place had been important once, important enough to bury deep underground and stock with enough supplies to outlast an apocalypse. Important enough that someone might still care about its secrets. "What exactly did they do here?" she asked. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across a wall covered with faded maps and charts. Research mostly, communications, the kind of work that required isolation and security. He paused, studying her face in the dim light. The kind of work that some people think should stay buried. A sound echoed through the bunker then, distant but unmistakable. Metal against metal, like a door opening somewhere far above them. Marcus froze, his hand moving instinctively to the radio on his belt. The sound came again, followed by what might have been footsteps. Emma whimpered and pressed closer to Sarah. Tommy looked up from the computer terminal, his eyes wide with sudden fear. In the green-tinged emergency lighting, they all looked like ghosts. Marcus switched off his flashlight and motioned for silence. In the darkness, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, and she wondered if bringing her children to this buried tomb had been salvation or the worst mistake of her life. The morning light filtered through the bunker's ventilation system in thin, golden streams that did little to warm the concrete walls. Marcus watched Sarah methodically portion out the last of their crackers, her movements precise despite the exhaustion etched across her face. Emma sat curled against her mother's side, while Tommy explored the perimeter of their makeshift camp with the restless energy of a caged animal. "We can't stay here much longer," Sarah said quietly, not looking up from her task. "The kids need real food, a proper bath. This place—" She shuddered. "It feels like a tomb." Marcus understood her unease. He'd spent the night studying the strange equipment scattered throughout the bunker's deeper chambers, trying to piece together what kind of research had been conducted here. The documentation he'd found painted a picture of psychological experimentation that made his skin crawl. Sleep had come in fragments, punctuated by dreams of shadowy figures and the sound of footsteps that might or might not have been real. "I know someone who might help," he said finally. "Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She's a psychologist who works with displaced families. Discreet, trustworthy. If anyone can help us navigate this without involving the authorities immediately, it's her. Sarah's head snapped up. You want to bring someone else into this? Marcus, you saw what they did to that man yesterday. These people are exactly why we need help. Marcus kept his voice low, mindful of the children. Whatever happened here, whatever these documents contain, it's bigger than just us hiding in an abandoned bunker. We need allies. A metallic clank echoed from somewhere deeper in the facility. All four of them froze, listening. Tommy's exploration had taken him toward the main corridor, but the sound had come from the opposite direction, from areas they hadn't yet explored. Stay here, Marcus whispered, rising slowly. He retrieved the heavy flashlight from their supplies and moved toward the source of the noise. Behind him, he heard Sarah gathering the children closer. The corridor stretched into darkness, lined with doors that hung open like gaping mouths. Marcus had avoided this section yesterday, focused on securing their immediate shelter, but now he realized his mistake. The bunker was larger than he'd initially assessed, with multiple levels and wings that branched off like arteries from the main hub. Another sound, definitely footsteps, deliberate and careful. Someone was down here with them. Marcus extinguished his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. His ranger training kicked in, years of tracking poachers and lost hikers in dense wilderness. He moved forward silently, using the walls to guide him. The footsteps stopped. Then, a different sound, papers rustling, drawers being opened and closed with systematic precision. Someone was searching for something specific. Marcus crept forward until he reached an intersection. Pale light emanated from a room to his left, and he could make out the silhouette of a figure hunched over what appeared to be a filing cabinet. The person wore dark clothing and moved with professional efficiency, photographing documents, with a small camera that emitted no flash. A floorboard creaked under Marcus's foot, an impossible sound in a concrete bunker, but somehow the aged facility found a way to betray him. The figure spun around and Marcus caught a glimpse of a woman's face, middle-aged with sharp features and intelligent eyes that registered his presence with calculating speed rather than surprise. "Ranger Williams," she said calmly, as if they'd encountered each other on a nature trail rather than in an abandoned government facility. I wondered when we'd meet. The fact that she knew his name sent ice through his veins. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been trying to keep this place buried for 15 years. She closed the filing cabinet with deliberate care. "Until you decided to play Good Samaritan and led a family right into the middle of it. They needed help. They were sleeping rough. They were safe." Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Anonymous, invisible, forgotten. Now they're witnesses to something that officially never existed. Marcus heard movement behind him, Sarah's voice calling his name softly from their shelter. The woman's eyes shifted past him toward the sound, and something predatory flickered across her expression. "Dr. Sarah Chen," the woman continued, and Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. Former research psychologist, lost her position at the university under rather tragic circumstances, fled with her children when her ex-husband's gambling debts attracted the wrong kind of attention. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Sarah's knowledge of psychological research, her fear of official channels, the way she'd recognized some of the terminology in the documents they'd found. She wasn't just a random victim of circumstance. She worked here, Marcus said. 15 years ago, before it all went wrong. The woman stepped closer, her hand moving to something concealed beneath her jacket. Before the subject started dying and the project was terminated. She knows what happened in these rooms, Ranger Williams, and there are people who will do anything to ensure she never remembers. The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jerking Marcus from restless sleep. Sarah's voice cut through the static, urgent and breathless. "Marcus, you need to get back here, now." He rolled off the narrow cot, Elena stirring beside him. The children remained curled together on the opposite bunk, Tommy's arm protective around his sister even in sleep. "What's wrong?" Marcus whispered into the radio. "There's been an incident at the visitor center. Someone broke in, ransacked the place. They were looking for something specific, all the old records, maps, anything related to the eastern sector." "Marcus, they know." Ice formed in his stomach. "Are you hurt?" "No, but there's more. I found tire tracks leading toward your patrol route. Fresh ones. And Marcus—" Her voice dropped. There was blood on the door handle. Elena was fully awake now, her eyes wide with fear as she caught fragments of the conversation. Marcus held up a hand, trying to think through the implications. "How long ago?" "I got here 20 minutes ago. The alarm company called me when the silent alarm triggered. Police are en route, but I told them it looked like vandalism. Bought you some time." Marcus closed his eyes, weighing options. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to grab Elena and the kids and disappear into the forest. But where could they go? And whoever was hunting them had resources, patience, and clearly knew more about the bunker than he'd feared. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Check the personnel files from the 70s and 80s. Look for anyone connected to the Eastern Sector surveys." "Already on it." "Marcus, there's something else. That corporate number you had me trace? It's connected to a security firm called Blackwood Solutions. They specialize in environmental cleanup and historical site management." Environmental cleanup. The phrase sent a chill down his spine. He thought about the sealed areas deeper in the bunker, the sections he never explored, marked with radiation warnings and hazmat symbols. "Sarah, get out of there. Go home, stay low. I'll contact you when I can." "Marcus, wait." He switched off the radio and turned to find Elena watching him with knowing eyes. "They found us," she said. It wasn't a question. Not yet, but they're close. He moved to the weapons locker, retrieving the shotgun and checking the ammunition. "We need to go deeper." "Deeper?" Elena's voice cracked. "Into this place? There are other levels, areas I haven't explored. It's our best chance to stay hidden while we figure out who's behind this." Elena shook her head violently. "No, we're taking the children and leaving, right now." "Elena, listen to me." Marcus knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "These people killed your husband. They burned down your house. They won't stop hunting you no matter how far you run. Our only chance is to find out what they want and use it against them." She stared at him for a long moment, then glanced at her sleeping children. When she looked back, her expression had hardened into something Marcus hadn't seen before, a fierce, protective resolve that reminded him of a cornered wolf. "Then we go deeper," she said quietly. They woke the children as gently as possible, Tommy's eyes immediately alert, while Lucy clung sleepily to her mother. Marcus packed their meager supplies, while Elena explained they were moving to a safer room in their underground hideout. The access to the lower levels lay behind a heavy steel door, marked with faded warnings in English and Russian. Marcus had discovered it during his second exploration, but had never ventured beyond the first corridor. The electronic lock was old but functional, responding to a general override code he'd found in the bunker's operations manual. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a stairwell that descended into absolute darkness. The air that wafted up was stale and metallic, carrying undertones of something chemical and unsettling. "Stay close," Marcus whispered, switching on his flashlight. "Hold hands, don't let go." They descended single file, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The walls here were different, newer concrete reinforced with steel mesh, designed to contain rather than simply shelter. Warning signs appeared at regular intervals, most in languages Marcus couldn't read. At the bottom, they emerged into a corridor lined with sealed doors. Emergency lighting flickered to life as motion sensors detected their presence, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made their shadows dance like living things. Tommy pressed closer to his mother. "Mom, I don't like this place." Elena pulled both children against her sides. "I know, baby, but we're safe here." Marcus wasn't sure safe was the right word. The bunker had protected them so far, but every step deeper felt like descending into the Earth's buried secrets. Secrets that people were willing to kill to keep hidden. Above them, he could swear he heard the distant sound of footsteps. The morning sun filtered through the bunker's single window, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Sarah's children still slept. Marcus had been awake for hours, his mind racing through possibilities and escape routes. The radio crackled softly in the corner, tuned to the ranger station frequency, but he'd kept the volume low to avoid waking anyone. Sarah stirred first, her eyes immediately alert despite having slept only fitfully. She'd positioned herself between her children and the bunker's entrance, even here in what Marcus had promised was safety. Trust, he realized, would take more than a hidden room and a few kind words. "Any word from outside?" she whispered, careful not to wake Emma and Jake. Marcus shook his head. "Nothing on the official channels. But that doesn't mean much. He'd been monitoring not just the park service frequency, but also police bands and emergency services. The silence was almost more unsettling than chatter would have been. Emma's eyes opened, and she sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The harsh reality of their situation crashed back over her young face, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. No child should have to wake up afraid. "I'm hungry," Jake announced matter-of-factly, rubbing his eyes. At 7, he seemed to possess a remarkable ability to focus on immediate needs rather than dwelling on circumstances beyond his control. "I've got some supplies," Marcus said, moving to a metal cabinet he'd discovered the previous evening. "Military rations mostly. Not exactly gourmet, but it'll keep us going." As they shared a sparse breakfast of crackers and canned peaches, Marcus found himself studying the bunker more carefully in the daylight. The construction was solid, clearly built to last. Documents scattered on the desk bore dates from the 1960s, and the equipment, though outdated, appeared to have been maintained far more recently than the Cold War era would suggest. "Marcus." Sarah's voice carried a warning edge that made him look up sharply. She was standing by the radio, headphones pressed to one ear. Her face had gone pale, and she was gesturing for him to join her. He crossed the small space quickly, accepting the headphones she handed him. "Requesting immediate backup at the Hartwell residence. Suspects are armed and extremely dangerous. Repeat, we have a possible homicide scene and suspects are in the wind." Marcus's blood chilled. Hartwell was Sarah's married name, he remembered. Someone had discovered whatever scene they'd left behind, and the official response was already in motion. "They found the house," he said quietly, removing the headphones. Sarah nodded, her jaw set. "It's starting, Mummy?" Emma had picked up on the tension in their voices. "What's happening?" "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart," Sarah said, but her voice carried a tremor that belied her words. "We're safe here." Marcus wasn't so sure about that anymore. The bunker provided temporary shelter, but it wasn't a long-term solution. Worse, he was beginning to suspect that their presence here might have triggered something larger than a simple missing persons case. He moved to the desk and began examining the papers more systematically. Most were routine Cold War communications, but buried beneath the obvious documents, he found something that made his pulse quicken. A maintenance log, with entries dating from just 2 years ago. Someone had been using this facility recently. "Sarah," he called softly, "you need to see this." She joined him at the desk, leaving the children to sort through the remaining food supplies. The maintenance log was detailed, professional. Equipment checks, security assessments, supply inventories. Someone had been treating this abandoned bunker as an active facility. "What do you think they were doing here?" Sarah asked. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think your husband stumbled onto something bigger than either of us realized." Marcus flipped through more pages, finding references to other sites, other bunkers scattered throughout the region. This wasn't just about one location. A new voice crackled over the radio, different from the police frequency they'd been monitoring. The transmission was brief, coded, but Marcus caught enough to understand that multiple agencies were now involved in the search. Federal agencies. "We need to move," he said, making the decision quickly. This place isn't safe anymore. Where can we go? Sarah's composure was beginning to crack. If they're looking this hard, if it's gone federal, I know other places. Caves, old mining sites, locations that aren't on any official maps. Marcus was already gathering their meager supplies. But first, we need to understand what your husband discovered. These documents might be our only leverage. He began stuffing papers into his backpack, focusing on the most recent entries and anything that referenced other locations. Whatever network David Hartwell had uncovered, it was still active, still dangerous enough that powerful people were willing to kill to protect it. "Mommy, are we leaving again?" Jake asked, his young voice carrying a weariness that broke Marcus's heart. "Yes, baby. We're going on another adventure." Marcus hoped Sarah was right about it being an adventure, because with each passing hour, it was feeling more like a war they were losing. The emergency radio crackled to life just as Marcus finished barricading the bunker's main entrance with fallen logs and debris. Sarah's voice cut through the static, tense and urgent. "Marcus, where the hell are you? We've got search teams crawling all over Sector 7, and Detective Morrison is asking a lot of pointed questions about your whereabouts." He glanced back at the concealed entrance, where Elena and her children waited in the artificial twilight below, the weight of his deception pressed against his chest like a physical force. Every moment he delayed responding would make Sarah more suspicious. "I'm checking the northern perimeter," he radioed back, hating how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. "Storm damage assessment. Lot of downed trees up here." "Well, wrap it up. Morrison wants to interview all staff about any unusual activity in the past week. He's setting up at the ranger station." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the silent radio. Detective Morrison, he'd heard the name whispered in worried conversations between Elena and Anna. The man hunting them was closing in. Below ground, Elena paced the length of the bunker's main chamber like a caged animal. The children had adapted to their underground sanctuary with the resilience of youth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd simply traded one trap for another. The walls seemed to press closer with each passing hour, and the recycled air tasted of secrets and decay. Anna emerged from one of the side chambers, her face pale in the LED lantern light. "Mom, you need to see this." Elena followed her daughter deeper into the bunker, past rooms filled with outdated equipment and filing cabinets thick with dust. Anna led her to a small office space, where Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered photographs and documents. "I was just looking around," Tommy said defensively, sensing his mother's disapproval. "But look at this stuff." Elena knelt beside him, her breath catching as she recognized faces in the black and white photographs. Scientists in lab coats standing beside equipment she couldn't identify. Groups of men in suits examining charts and graphs. And in several photos, a younger version of a face she knew all too well, Dr. Harrison Vaughan, the man whose research she'd uncovered, whose secrets had started this nightmare. "Project Nightfall," Anna read from a folder tab. "Mom, this is the same project mentioned in those files Dad was investigating." Elena's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Page after page of technical documentation, budget allocations, and personnel assignments painted a picture of a massive government operation conducted in secret during the height of the Cold War. But it was the final report that made her blood run cold. "Psychological warfare applications successful," she read aloud. "Recommend immediate classification upgrade and transfer to Black Site Facility 7. All local personnel to be reassigned or—" She stopped, unable to voice the euphemistic language that clearly meant something far more permanent. "They killed people to keep this secret," Anna whispered. Before Elena could respond, they heard Marcus's boots on the metal stairs. His face was grim as he descended into their underground refuge. "We have a problem," he announced. "Detective Morrison is interviewing all park staff. If I don't show up soon, they'll start wondering why. And if I do show up, I'll have to lie to a police detective's face about your whereabouts." Elena gathered the scattered documents with shaking hands. "We can't ask you to do that. We've already put you in enough danger." It's too late for that, Marcus said, his voice hollow. I'm already in this up to my neck, but if Morrison is here, it means they're not just hunting you. They're closing the net. There's something else, Elena said, showing him the Project Nightfall files. This bunker wasn't just a shelter, it was a research facility. Whatever my husband discovered, whatever got him killed, it all traces back to experiments that happened right here decades ago. Marcus studied the photographs, his expression growing darker. My grandfather helped build this bunker. He never talked about what went on here, but sometimes I'd catch him staring off into the woods with this haunted look. He'd say the forest had too many ghosts. A sound from above made them all freeze, the distant rumble of vehicle engines approaching through the forest. Marcus grabbed his radio and switched to the Park Service frequency, keeping the volume low. Expanded search grid to include all abandoned structures and historical sites. Ranger Blake, report to Sector 7 for equipment drop. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. They were running out of time, and their sanctuary was about to become a trap. The bunker that had promised safety now felt like a tomb, its concrete walls closing in as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Marcus looked between Elena and her children, weighing impossible choices. Above them, engines grew louder, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the bunker's walls, footsteps approached through the undergrowth. The radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jerking Marcus from a restless sleep on the bunker's concrete floor. Sarah's voice, distorted by static, cut through the underground silence. "Marcus, you there? We've got a problem." He fumbled for the handset, glancing at Elena, and the children huddled in their makeshift bedding. Tommy stirred but didn't wake. "I'm here. What's wrong?" "Those federal agents. They're not federal agents. I ran their credentials through every database I could access. The badges are fake, Marcus. Really good fakes, but fake nonetheless." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Are you sure?" "Dead sure. And there's more. I did some digging on that company name we found in the files. Meridian Dynamics. Officially, they don't exist. No incorporation records, no tax filings, nothing. But I found traces of them in some classified procurement documents from the 80s. Black budget stuff." Elena was awake now, her eyes sharp and alert despite the early hour. She crawled closer, straining to hear. "What kind of procurement?" Marcus whispered. "Biological research. Something called Project Lazarus. The documentation is heavily redacted, but from what I can piece together, they were developing some kind of compound. The last entry I found was dated 3 weeks before the bunker was supposedly decommissioned." Marcus exchanged a look with Elena. She was thinking the same thing. The sealed laboratory they'd discovered, the pristine equipment that looked far too advanced for the 1980s. "Sarah, listen carefully. I need you to get out of town, tonight. Don't go home, don't stop for anything, just drive." "What?" "Marcus, what the hell is going on down there?" Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the bunker that made his blood freeze, the distant clang of the entrance hatch opening. Someone had found them. "They're here." He breathed into the radio, then switched it off. Elena was already moving, gently shaking Maya and Tommy awake. "We need to go. Right now. No talking." Marcus grabbed the emergency pack he'd prepared and led them deeper into the bunker, away from the main corridor. His flashlight beam danced across the walls as they moved through sections he'd barely explored. Behind them, he could hear voices, multiple people, moving with military precision. Thermal scans show heat signatures in the lower levels. A man's voice echoed through the concrete tunnels. 4 individuals, heading toward the research wing. Research wing. Even their pursuers knew this place better than Marcus did. They reached a junction where 3 corridors branched off into darkness. Marcus paused, listening. Footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sweep of tactical flashlights. Elena pulled the children close, Tommy's eyes wide with terror, Maya clutching her stuffed elephant. "This way," Marcus decided, choosing the leftmost tunnel. It sloped downward, deeper into the earth than he'd been before. The air grew colder, carrying a faint chemical odor that made his nose burn. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that their flashlights couldn't fully illuminate. As they moved forward, Marcus's beam caught something that made him stop short. Rows of cylindrical tanks, each about the size of a phone booth, filled with murky liquid. Tubes and cables snaked between them like arteries. "Jesus," Elena breathed. "What is this place?" Tommy pointed at one of the tanks. "There's something inside." Marcus didn't want to look, but he had to. His flashlight revealed shapes suspended in the fluid, not quite human, not quite animal. Aborted experiments in whatever Project Lazarus had really been about. "We can't stay here," Elena whispered, backing away from the tanks. A new sound reached them, the hum of electricity. Emergency lighting flickered to life throughout the chamber, revealing the full scope of the laboratory. There had to be 50 tanks, maybe more. And at the far end, a massive computer system that had just powered up. "Welcome to Project Lazarus." The voice came from speakers hidden in the walls. Marcus spun around, searching for its source. "You've led us quite a chase, Mr. Cole, but you've also solved a problem for us. We've been looking for test subjects for the next phase of our research. A family unit will provide excellent data." "Run," Marcus said. They bolted toward an exit on the opposite side of the chamber, but steel barriers slammed down, sealing every doorway. The lighting grew brighter, and Marcus could see men in hazmat suits entering through openings that hadn't been there moments before. "The compound requires fresh subjects every few years," the voice continued, almost conversational. "The previous batch has deteriorated, but don't worry, your contribution to science will be remembered." One of the suited figures raised a weapon, not a gun, but some kind of dart rifle. Marcus pushed Elena and the children behind one of the tanks, his mind racing. There had to be another way out. There was always another way out. But as more figures appeared surrounding their position, Marcus began to wonder if his split-second decision in the forest had doomed them all. The morning light filtering through the bunker's ventilation system cast eerie shadows across the concrete walls as Marcus studied the documents spread before him. Sarah sat beside him, her children still sleeping on the makeshift beds they'd arranged in the corner. The papers told a story that made his blood run cold. "Project Mindbridge," Sarah whispered, reading over his shoulder. "Neural pathway manipulation through electromagnetic frequency exposure. Test subjects, local population, ages 8 to 45. Her voice cracked. "They were experimenting on people, Marcus, on families." Marcus traced his finger along a personnel roster dated 15 years ago. Names he recognized. Former residents of Pine Ridge who'd moved away suddenly, citing health problems or job opportunities elsewhere. But according to these files, they hadn't left voluntarily. They'd been relocated after exhibiting adverse reactions to prolonged exposure. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling out a medical report. Subject 247, chronic migraines, memory gaps, aggressive behavior onset after 6 months of testing. She flipped the page. Subject 248, complete psychological breakdown, early onset dementia at age 32. A soft rustling made them both freeze. Emma was stirring, her small face scrunched in apparent discomfort. As they watched, she pressed her palms against her temples and whimpered. "The headaches," Sarah breathed. "They started after we moved to Pine Ridge." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "The cell tower construction 6 months ago. Chen mentioned it was on an accelerated schedule, priority funding from some government contractor. He grabbed another file, the same contractor listed here as funding Mindbridge." Sarah's face had gone pale. "You think they reactivated the project?" Before Marcus could respond, his radio crackled to life. Chen's voice, tight with urgency. "Marcus, we've got a problem. Multiple vehicles heading toward the old mining road. Black SUVs, government plates. I counted at least 8 men." Marcus keyed the radio. "How far out?" 20 minutes, maybe less. "They're moving fast, and they look serious." Sarah was already shaking her children awake. "Get up, sweethearts. We need to move again." Tommy's eyes were bloodshot, and he swayed slightly as he stood. The electromagnetic exposure was affecting them all, but the children seemed most vulnerable. Marcus had noticed his own growing unease since entering the bunker, a persistent buzzing in his skull that seemed to intensify near certain sections of wall. "There's another way out," Marcus said, grabbing the most crucial documents. "Emergency exit through the old mine shaft. It connects to a natural cave system that leads up the mountain." As they gathered their few belongings, Sarah clutched his arm. "The other families in Pine Ridge, they don't know. We have to warn them. First we keep you alive," Marcus replied grimly. "Then we expose this." They moved quickly through the bunker's maze of corridors, Marcus leading with a flashlight while Sarah brought up the rear with Emma. The little girl was struggling, her breathing labored and her coordination off. Whatever frequencies were being generated in the facility, prolonged exposure was clearly dangerous. The emergency exit was hidden behind a false wall panel, its mechanism still functional after decades. As Marcus worked the manual release, they could hear the distant rumble of engines approaching the main entrance. "Hurry," Sarah urged, glancing back nervously. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel that angled sharply upward. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and minerals. Marcus squeezed through first, then helped pull the children after him. Sarah came last, clutching the remaining documents. They'd barely made it 50 yards into the tunnel when the sounds began echoing up from the bunker below. Shouts, heavy footsteps, the methodical searching of rooms. Whoever was down there knew exactly where to look. "Keep moving," Marcus whispered, though every instinct told him they were walking into a trap. The people behind this operation had been planning for decades. They wouldn't have overlooked a secondary exit. The tunnel branched ahead, one path leading toward the surface, another deeper into the mountain. Marcus hesitated, playing his light over both options. Fresh scuff marks in the dust showed recent foot traffic in the upward tunnel, too recent. "This way," he said, taking the deeper path. "Trust me." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were growing closer. Flashlight beams began to dance off the tunnel walls, and Marcus could hear radio chatter bouncing off the stone surfaces. Professional voices, coordinated movement. These weren't just government bureaucrats trying to contain a leak, they were trained operatives. Sarah stumbled, catching herself against the tunnel wall. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and fear, but her eyes held a fierce determination. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "don't let them take the kids back to that place." Marcus nodded grimly as they pressed forward into the darkness, the weight of documents in his pack feeling like the heaviest burden he'd ever carried. Somewhere ahead lay either salvation or a dead end. Behind them, the voices were getting closer, and time was running out. The radio crackled to life at 4:17 a.m., jarring Marcus from the shallow sleep he'd managed against the bunker's cold concrete wall. Sarah's voice cut through the static, urgent and breathless. "Marcus, are you there? Please tell me you're there." He grabbed the handset, careful not to wake Elena and the children huddled in their makeshift beds nearby. "I'm here. What's wrong?" "They found my truck. Federal agents showed up at the ranger station 20 minutes ago asking questions. They know you're out there, and they know you're not alone." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Through the bunker's narrow observation window, he could see the first pale hints of dawn creeping through the forest canopy. "How much time do we have?" "Not much. They're organizing search teams now. Marcus, there's something else. I accessed more of those files before they locked me out of the system. Project Lazarus wasn't just about chemical weapons. They were developing something called a neural mapping protocol, something that could alter memories, plant false ones, erase entire periods of time. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Elena's fragmented memories, her inability to recall specific details about her husband's work, the way she sometimes stared into space as if grasping for something just out of reach. "They already used it on her," Marcus whispered into the radio. "What?" "Elena. That's why she can't remember everything clearly. They wiped her memories." A soft gasp came from behind him. Marcus turned to find Elena standing in the doorway of the sleeping area, her face pale in the dim light. Her eyes held a terrible recognition, as if his words had unlocked something she'd been trying to reach for weeks. "I knew," she said quietly. "Deep down, I knew something was wrong with my memories. Like trying to remember a dream after waking up." Marcus set down the radio and moved toward her. "Elena." "No." Her voice was stronger now, resolved. "I'm tired of being their victim. My children deserve to know the truth about their father, and I deserve to remember the man I loved." Sarah's voice crackled through the radio again. "Marcus, I'm looking at the search grid. They're starting from the main trail and working outward in a spiral pattern. You've got maybe 3 hours before they reach your sector." Elena walked to the filing cabinet they'd discovered, her movements deliberate. She pulled out a thick folder labeled with her husband's name and project codes. David kept backup files, not just about the research, but about what they did to the test subjects, what they planned to do to anyone who learned too much. She opened the folder, revealing photographs, medical records, and handwritten notes in the margins. Marcus saw images of laboratory subjects with vacant stares, pages of neurological data, and David's increasingly frantic observations about the moral implications of their work. "He was going to expose them," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger as the memories seemed to resurface. "That's why we were running. Not because of the chemical weapons research, because David discovered they'd been testing the memory modification protocol on prisoners, refugees, people who wouldn't be missed." Marcus felt sick, and when he threatened to go public, they eliminated the threat. But they needed to know what he'd told me, what evidence I might have. So they used the protocol on me before staging our deaths. Elena's hands trembled as she held a photograph of herself connected to electrodes, her expression blank and compliant. The radio squawked again. "Marcus, there's movement on the access road, multiple vehicles. You need to move now." "Where can we go?" Marcus asked Sarah. "They'll have the entire forest covered. There's an old mining complex about 2 miles north of your position. Abandoned since the 70s, but the tunnels go deep. Some of them connect to natural cave systems that run for miles underground." Elena was already gathering the files, stuffing them into a waterproof bag. "We take everything, every piece of evidence David collected." "Mama, what's happening?" Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, with little Diego clinging to her pajama top. Elena knelt down and pulled her children close. "We're going on another adventure, sweetheart. But this time, we're going to make sure no one can hurt us again." Marcus shouldered his pack and checked his weapon. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. These weren't just innocent civilians anymore. They were the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Getting them to safety wasn't just about saving their lives. It was about ensuring the truth survived. "Sarah, we're moving to the mining complex. Stay on Channel 6 and keep monitoring their search frequency." "Copy that. And Marcus, watch the third tunnel from the entrance." David's notes mention a secondary research site. If I'm reading this right, there might be more evidence hidden there. As they prepared to leave the bunker that had sheltered them, Marcus realized their nightmare was far from over. But for the first time since this began, they weren't just running from the truth. They were carrying it with them. The sound of helicopters had grown distant, but Marcus knew they'd be back. He crouched beside the radio equipment, Sarah's notebook spread before him like a treasure map written in a language he was still learning to understand. The encryption keys she'd meticulously documented were their only hope of breaking through the communication blackout that had trapped them underground. "Any luck?" Elena whispered from across the control room, where she sat with Tommy curled against her side. The boy had finally stopped shaking, but his eyes remained fixed on the ceiling every time the distant rumble of aircraft passed overhead. "Getting closer," Marcus replied, though frustration gnawed at him. Each attempt to establish an outside connection had been met with sophisticated jamming signals. Whoever was hunting them had resources that went far beyond corporate security. This was military-grade suppression. His fingers moved across Sarah's notes, following her breadcrumb trail through the facility's communication protocols. She'd been brilliant, paranoid, but brilliant. Every system had a backup, every backup had an override, and every override had been carefully hidden behind layers of misdirection. Dad always said Mom was too smart for her own good, Maya said softly. She'd been quiet since they'd found the evidence of her mother's final days, processing grief that had been frozen in uncertainty for months. She used to leave us puzzles when we were little, birthday treasure hunts that took hours to solve. Marcus looked up from the equipment. This feels like one of those treasure hunts. She knew someone might need to follow her path. The radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that made them all freeze. Marcus adjusted the frequency, chasing the signal through the electromagnetic maze Sarah had constructed. There, a clear channel, hidden beneath layers of white noise and scrambled transmissions. "Mayday, Mayday," he spoke into the microphone. "This is Park Ranger Marcus Chen, requesting immediate assistance. We have civilians in danger and evidence of criminal conspiracy involving..." The transmission cut to static. Then, impossibly, a familiar voice emerged from the speakers. "Marcus? Jesus Christ, we've been looking everywhere for you." It was his supervisor, District Ranger Patricia Morse. Relief flooded through him like cool water. "Patty, thank God. Listen carefully. We're in an underground facility approximately 2 miles northeast of Sector 7. There are people trying to kill us, and we have evidence of illegal weapons testing that..." "Slow down," Patty's voice interrupted. "Underground facility? Marcus, what the hell are you talking about? We've got reports you kidnapped a woman and her children." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What? No, that's not. Patty, someone is lying to you. We're the ones being hunted." Static filled the channel for several seconds. When Patty's voice returned, it sounded different. "Careful. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Bring the family up to the surface. We have people waiting to help." Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. He looked at Elena, saw the same recognition dawning in her eyes. The voice was right, but the words were wrong. Patty would never have been so formal, so scripted. In 15 years of working together, she'd never called him anything but Chen over the radio. "Patty," he said slowly, "remember that time we found the abandoned meth lab in Copper Canyon? What did you say about the smell?" Another pause. "Too long. It smelled like chemicals." Marcus felt the last of his hope crumble. The real Patty had said it smelled like her ex-husband's cooking, terrible and probably toxic. It was the kind of dark humor that had gotten them through countless difficult situations. "Who is this?" he demanded. The pretense dropped immediately. The voice that emerged from the radio was calm, professional, and utterly without warmth. "This is Colonel James Harrison, Department of Defense Special Projects Division. You and your companions have approximately 1 hour to surrender yourselves at the primary entrance to the facility. After that time, we will be forced to employ more direct extraction methods." "You mean you'll try to kill us?" "I mean we'll succeed," Harrison replied matter-of-factly. "Dr. Morgan's research represents a significant national security asset. Her theft of classified materials cannot be overlooked, regardless of her current status." Maya's sharp intake of breath cut through the static. "She wasn't a thief," she said, leaning toward the microphone. "She was trying to stop you from hurting people." "Miss Reeves," Harrison's voice softened slightly, taking on an almost paternal tone. "Your mother made choices that put you and your brother in danger. We can protect you, but only if you cooperate. Like you protected her," Maya shot back. The radio went silent for a long moment. When Harrison spoke again, all pretense of warmth had vanished. "1 hour, Ranger Chen. Use it wisely." The transmission ended, leaving them in the humming quiet of the underground facility. Marcus stared at the radio, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. They had Sarah's evidence, but no way to transmit it. They had temporary shelter, but no escape route. "What do we do now?" Elena asked. Marcus looked around the control room. At the banks of equipment Sarah had spent her final months understanding. At the children she'd died trying to protect. An idea began forming. Dangerous, probably impossible, but their only chance. We give them exactly what they don't expect, he said. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Marcus crouched beside the junction box, his hands shaking as he stripped wire casings with his pocket knife. Sarah held the flashlight steady while Elena watched the children, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep against the far wall. The bunker felt smaller now, the concrete walls pressing in with the weight of everything they'd discovered. "How much time do you think we have?" Sarah whispered, glancing toward the sealed entrance where they'd barricaded themselves in 3 hours ago. Marcus twisted copper wires together, his ranger training in basic electrical work, their only hope of getting the emergency communication system online. Kellner's people won't wait much longer. They know we're trapped down here. The sound of muffled voices echoed through the ventilation system, followed by the distinct whir of power tools. Sarah's grip tightened on the flashlight. They're cutting through the blast door. "Almost got it," Marcus muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the bunker's chill. The communication array was old Soviet tech built to survive nuclear war, but 40 years of neglect had corroded most of the connections. He touched 2 wires together, and the console sparked to life, amber displays flickering with Cyrillic text. Elena looked up from where she sat with her children. "I can read some of that. My grandmother was Russian." Marcus waved her over as he found the frequency selector. "We need to reach Park headquarters first, then the FBI. Tell them about Kellner, about what we found here." The children stirred as Tom's voice crackled through from above, distorted by the bunker's thick concrete. "Marcus, we know you're down there. Send up the woman and kids, and we'll let you walk away." Sarah shook her head. "He's lying. After what we've seen, what we know about the weapons cache, the money laundering through his construction company." "I know." Marcus adjusted the frequency dial, searching for any sign of an open channel. Static filled the small space, punctuated by the growing sound of cutting equipment above them. They'd found the emergency exit hatch. Elena's fingers moved across the control panel, switching to what looked like an emergency broadcast setting. "There," she said. "This should reach multiple frequencies." Marcus keyed the microphone. "This is Park Ranger Marcus Chen, badge number 774. I'm in an emergency situation at coordinates." He rattled off their location, describing the bunker, Kellner's involvement, and the cache of weapons they'd discovered. The static seemed to swallow his words. A new sound echoed through the bunker, the screech of metal being forced apart. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "They're almost through." Elena's daughter Emma began to whimper, sensing the adult's fear. Elena pulled both children closer, her face pale but determined. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. Bringing us here, protecting us. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Marcus tried another frequency. This time a faint voice responded through the static. "Copy your transmission. This is FBI Agent Rodriguez. Are you—" The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red light, but the communication system had died with the main power grid. Marcus pounded the console, trying to bring it back online, but the displays remained dark. "They cut the external power," Sarah said. "How long will the backup last?" Before Marcus could answer, the sound of the hatch being breached echoed through the bunker. Footsteps on metal ladder rungs. Tom's voice, clearer now. "Secure the area. Find them." Marcus looked around desperately. The bunker was essentially one large room with a few smaller chambers branching off. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. But then he remembered the ventilation system they'd explored earlier, the shaft that led to the old missile silo. "This way," he whispered, leading them toward a grate in the wall. The shaft beyond was barely wide enough for an adult, but it was their only option. Sarah helped boost the children up first, Elena following close behind. As Marcus prepared to climb up after them, footsteps echoed in the main bunker behind them. A flashlight beam swept across the walls. "Movement in the north chamber," someone called out. Marcus hauled himself into the shaft just as gunfire erupted below. bullets sparking off concrete where he'd been standing moments before. He pulled the grate closed behind him and crawled forward as fast as he could, following the faint outline of Sarah's feet ahead of him. The shaft angled upward, following the bunker's original ventilation design. Behind them, Marcus could hear Kellner's men discovering the open grate, arguing about who would follow them into the narrow space. "Keep moving," he whispered forward to the others. "The silo's not far." But as they crawled through the darkness, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were simply trading one trap for another, and somewhere in the distance he could swear he heard the sound of vehicles approaching through the forest above. The emergency broadcast cut through the static like a knife through flesh. Marcus pressed his ear closer to the radio as the automated voice droned through evacuation protocols, his blood running cold with each word. Sarah's face had gone ashen beside him, her hands instinctively reaching for Tommy and Emma as they huddled in the bunker's main chamber. "All residents within a 15-mile radius of grid reference 447 Delta must evacuate immediately," the voice continued. "This is not a drill. Chemical containment breach detected. Seek medical attention if experiencing respiratory distress, skin irritation, or visual impairment." The radio crackled, then fell silent. "They're covering it up," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse with rage, "making it sound like an accident." Sarah's grip tightened on her children. "The trucks we saw earlier, they weren't just destroying evidence, they were releasing something." Tommy coughed again, the sound wet and labored. Emma had developed a rash along her neck that seemed to be spreading by the hour. Marcus felt his own throat burning, each breath a reminder that whatever Corvin's people had unleashed was already in their systems. "We have to get to the hospital," Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, they all knew the futility. How could they explain their symptoms without revealing where they'd been? How could they trust that Corvin's influence didn't extend into the medical establishment? Marcus studied the tactical display still glowing on the bunker's wall screen. Red dots marked the positions of the chemical dispersal trucks, their methodical pattern creating a perfect containment grid around the forest. They weren't just eliminating witnesses, they were creating a narrative, a tragic environmental disaster that would justify cordoning off the area indefinitely. "There," he said, pointing to a gap in the pattern. "Northwest quadrant. They haven't fully secured that sector yet. You want us to run again?" Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Look at them, Marcus. Look at my children. They're sick." He turned to face her, seeing the fear and desperation that mirrored his own. "There's something else, something I should have told you earlier." He moved to one of the storage lockers, his fingers dancing across a hidden keypad. The lock disengaged with a soft hiss. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a small metallic canister marked with biohazard symbols. But these weren't the symbols they'd seen on the research documents. These were different, newer. "Antidote?" Sarah breathed. "Countermeasure," Marcus corrected. "Developed during the final phase of Project Blackwood before the program was supposedly shut down. The researchers knew they were playing with forces they couldn't fully control. Dr. Reeves, the woman whose journals we found, she wasn't just documenting the experiments, she was secretly developing fail-safes." Sarah stared at the canister. "How do you know this?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Because my father was part of the team that helped her hide it." The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah's eyes widened as the implications crashed over her. "Your father knew about this place. He knew about the experiments. He tried to stop them," Marcus said quickly. "When he realized what they were really doing, the human trials, the cover-ups, he helped Reeves sabotage the program from within. This bunker wasn't just a research facility, it became a backup plan, a way to preserve evidence and create countermeasures if Blackwood's poison ever saw the light of day again." Tommy's cough worsened, blood speckling his lips. Emma's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Time was running out. Marcus lifted the canister with reverent care. "It's designed to neutralize the chemical agents, but the dosage is tricky. Too little and it won't work. Too much and He didn't finish the sentence. "And what?" Sarah demanded. "The countermeasure is almost as dangerous as the poison itself." Outside, the sound of helicopters grew closer. Through the bunker's periscope, Marcus could see searchlights sweeping across the forest canopy. Corvin wasn't taking any chances. The evacuation was just a cover for a more thorough hunting expedition. "They'll find us soon," he said. "The thermal imaging will pick up our heat signatures eventually, even through the bunker's shielding." Sarah looked at her children, then back at Marcus. In her eyes, he saw the terrible calculus of a mother forced to choose between certain death and desperate hope. "Do it," she whispered. Marcus's hands trembled as he prepared the injection mechanism. The countermeasure would buy them time, maybe even save their lives. But it would also make them walking evidence of crimes that powerful people would do anything to hide. They would spend the rest of their lives running, assuming they survived the next few hours. The helicopter sounds grew deafening. Through the walls, they could hear vehicles approaching, voices shouting coordinates. Marcus looked at the syringe in his hand, then at the family he'd sworn to protect. In the distance, an explosion echoed through the forest as Corvin's forces began their final assault on the bunker. The choice was no longer whether to trust the countermeasure. The choice was whether to die fighting or die hiding. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, carved from living rock and reinforced with decades-old concrete. Marcus's flashlight beam danced across damp walls as Sarah clutched Tommy and Emma close behind him. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow passage, each sound amplified into ghostly whispers that seemed to follow them deeper into the mountain's belly. How much further? Sarah's voice trembled with exhaustion and fear. Marcus checked his watch. They'd been walking for 20 minutes since escaping the bunker's main level. The exit should be just ahead. This tunnel leads to an old mining shaft about half a mile from the ranger station. Behind them, distant voices bounced off the tunnel walls. Hartwell's men had found the entrance. Marcus quickened his pace, urging the family forward even as his own legs protested. The bullet wound in his shoulder throbbed with each step, but adrenaline kept him moving. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Marcus felt a flutter of hope. Fresh air touched his face, carrying the scent of pine and rain. They were close. There, he pointed ahead, where his light caught a rusted metal ladder bolted to the tunnel wall. Above it, a circular opening disappeared into darkness. "That's our way out," Emma whimpered as they approached the ladder. The rungs were slick with moisture and decades of corrosion. Marcus tested the first few. They held, but barely. "I'll go first," he said, holstering his weapon. "Sarah, you and the kids follow. Stay close to the wall in case a rung breaks." The climb felt eternal. Each rung groaned under their weight, and more than once Marcus's boot slipped on the corroded metal. Below them, flashlight beams began to pierce the tunnel's gloom as their pursuers drew closer. Marcus hauled himself through the opening into a moonlit forest clearing. The abandoned mine shaft sat like a wound in the earth, surrounded by twisted metal and rotting timber. He reached down to help Sarah lift the children up. "Move toward the trees," he whispered urgently. "We need cover." They'd barely reached the tree line when the first of Hartwell's men emerged from the shaft. Marcus pulled his pistol, knowing he had perhaps 3 rounds left. Not enough, not nearly enough. A rifle cracked from somewhere in the darkness, and the man at the shaft entrance dropped. Marcus spun toward the sound, his heart hammering. "Federal agents?" A voice boomed across the clearing. "Drop your weapons!" The forest erupted in chaos. More figures poured from the mine shaft, only to be met by a devastating crossfire from the surrounding woods. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like deadly fireflies. Marcus shoved Sarah and the children down behind a fallen log as bullets whined overhead. Through the gunfire, Marcus spotted a familiar figure. Agent Chen, the FBI investigator he'd contacted days ago about suspicious activity in the National Forest. She moved with tactical precision, her team systematically surrounding the mine entrance. The firefight lasted less than 5 minutes. When the shooting stopped, 4 of Hartwell's men lay dead or wounded in the clearing. Two others emerged from the shaft with their hands raised. "Marcus Torres," Chen called out. "You and the family can come out. It's over." Marcus helped Sarah and the children to their feet. Tommy clung to his mother's leg, while Emma buried her face against Sarah's shoulder. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were all alive. Chen approached with her weapon lowered. "Your message got our attention," she said. "When you mentioned Cold War bunkers and classified documents, we started connecting some dots. We've been tracking suspicious activity tied to defense contractors for months." "Hartwell?" Marcus asked. "Dead. My team found him in the bunker with a bullet in his head. Looks like his own people turned on him when things went sideways." Chen's expression was grim. "We also found what he was trying to hide. 23 bodies, Marcus. People who stumbled onto that facility over the years. Hikers, hunters, even a couple of kids who got lost." Sarah's face went white. If not for Marcus, she and her children would have joined that grim tally. "The documents we recovered detail illegal weapons testing, human experimentation, things that would destroy careers and topple governments if they came to light," Chen continued. "Hartwell was part of a network that's been covering this up for decades." As paramedics arrived to treat their injuries, Marcus watched Sarah hold her children close. They'd survived, but at what cost? The innocence of a quiet life in the forest was gone, replaced by the knowledge of what horrors humans could inflict on each other. The forest around them was the same, ancient pines swaying in the night breeze, the eternal whisper of wind through branches. But Marcus knew he would never see it the same way again. Every shadow might hide a secret. Every unexplored trail could lead to buried nightmares. Chen touched his good shoulder gently. "You did the right thing, Marcus. You saved them." As dawn broke over the mountains, Marcus wondered if saving them was enough to balance the scales of what they'd all lost in the darkness below. The emergency lights cast everything in hellish red as Marcus dragged Elena toward the exit shaft. Behind them, the sound of gunfire echoed through the concrete tunnels. Thompson's men had found another way in. Sarah clutched Tommy and Lily close as they stumbled through the narrow passage, the children's frightened whimpers barely audible over the chaos erupting behind them. "The ladder's just ahead," Marcus gasped, his shoulder screaming where a bullet had grazed him. Blood seeped through his ranger uniform, but adrenaline kept him moving. They'd made it this far. He wouldn't let them die now in these cursed tunnels. Elena stumbled, her legs giving out from exhaustion and terror. Marcus caught her, half carrying her the final 20 feet to where rusty ladder rungs disappeared upward into darkness. The emergency hatch above had to lead somewhere safe. It had to. "Sarah, you go first with the kids," Marcus ordered, checking his remaining ammunition. 3 bullets left. Not enough, but it would have to be. "What about you?" Sarah's eyes were wide with panic, but her voice stayed steady for her children's sake. "I'll hold them off. Give you time to get clear." Marcus pressed the key drive Elena had risked everything to retrieve into Sarah's hand. "Get this to the FBI. Agent Martinez. She's the only one you can trust. This evidence will bring down Thompson's entire network." The sound of boots pounding through the tunnels grew closer. Shouts echoed off the walls as Thompson's mercenaries spread out, searching every passage. They were running out of time. Sarah hesitated, torn between escape and leaving Marcus behind. "I won't abandon you, not after everything." "You have to." Marcus's voice cracked with urgency. "Those kids need their mother, and the world needs to know what Thompson's been doing down here. Go!" Elena gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "The failsafe," she whispered, her words barely audible. "In the main lab, red button behind the radiation symbol. If Thompson's men get that research—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Marcus understood. The biological weapons research couldn't fall into the wrong hands. If Thompson regained control of the bunker, the nightmare would continue somewhere else. New victims, new experiments, new horrors. "How long?" he asked. 10 minutes after activation, maybe less." Elena's face was pale but determined. "Enough time to get clear if you run." Sarah was already climbing. Tommy on her back, while Lily scrambled up beside them with the desperate agility of childhood fear. Their forms disappeared into the darkness above, and Marcus felt a moment of relief knowing they'd made it this far. But his job wasn't finished. Marcus helped Elena to the ladder, her scientist's hands shaking as she gripped the cold metal rungs. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me the chance to make this right." "Thank you for having the courage to try," Marcus replied. As Elena climbed, Marcus turned back toward the approaching sounds. He could hear Thompson's voice now, barking orders, coordinating the search. The man who'd turned this Cold War relic into a chamber of horrors was close. Marcus made his decision. Instead of following the others up the ladder, he sprinted back into the bunker's depths. His boots echoed off the concrete as he navigated the maze of corridors, muscle memory guiding him past the holding cells, past the abandoned equipment, toward the main laboratory where Elena had spent months creating horrors under Thompson's orders. The red emergency lighting made everything look like a scene from hell. How fitting, Marcus thought grimly. That's exactly what this place had become. He burst into the main lab just as Thompson and 3 armed men entered from the opposite corridor. Thompson's face twisted with rage when he saw Marcus. "The ranger who started all this trouble," Thompson snarled, raising his weapon. "Where are they? Where's my research?" Marcus smiled coldly, his hand already moving toward the radiation warning symbol on the wall. "Gone. Just like you're about to be." Thompson's eyes widened as he realized what Marcus intended. "Don't be a fool. You'll kill us all." "That's the idea," Marcus replied, and slammed his fist against the hidden button. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Emergency systems that had waited decades in dormancy suddenly roared to life. Automated voices announced the initiation of containment protocols. Thompson fired, but Marcus was already moving, using the lab equipment as cover. 9 minutes until the bunker sealed itself permanently, contaminating everything inside to prevent the escape of biological agents. 9 minutes to make sure Thompson never hurt anyone again. 9 minutes to find his own way out, if luck was with him. Above ground, Sarah emerged from the hidden hatch into the pre-dawn darkness, her children clinging to her as sirens wailed in the distance. She clutched the evidence that would expose everything, knowing that Marcus and Elena were still below, buying their freedom with the ultimate sacrifice. The forest had kept its secrets for decades, but some secrets were too dangerous to keep.